I will let Sara introduce herself, but the reason I asked Sara to come and join us is, as I mentioned several times already this morning, I find myself having the same conversation almost when it comes to the missing middle and much larger developments with the community. And I invited Sara, who does community engagement as part of her work day and night, to talk to us how you mitigate that. And we have here community members and we have people from the development community. And I think that is one of the most important topics, because I was hoping that the seminar today and tomorrow will also open the door for another dialogue, for another discussion between the development community and community members. So Sara, please take it from here and don't forget to introduce yourself.
Awesome, thank you. If you guys could just let me share my screen, that would be awesome. Then I'll get started. But as I'm waiting to share my screen, I'll introduce myself. My name's Sara Udow. I am co-founder and co-principal of Process. Let me just see if I can share. Okay, great, I can share now. So let me just do that. Thank you. I'm an urban and cultural planner and engagement specialist. I also want to say I'm originally from Treaty 1, Winnipeg, but I now live in Toronto, which is the traditional territory of many First Nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, Anishinaabe, Chippewa, Haudenosaunee, and Wendat peoples, and now is home to many more Indigenous communities. And the reason I start with that is because when we're talking about land development and housing, we all think we have a lot of rights in the city, homeowners, renters, everyone. But we also really need to start with the First Peoples and understand our role in truth and reconciliation. So let me get started. As a quick agenda, we want to do some quick intros. I'm not sure if this will allow everyone to share kind of where they're from, but we'll try that out. Then talk about the context, because I think context setting and framing an issue is so important to conversations around community engagement. And then we'll move into what meaningful engagement looks like, maybe get to some examples, and then I'm here to answer any questions you have. So as mentioned, I'm co-principal of and founder of Process. We're an urban and cultural planning studio that really focuses on engagement. We believe that creative, collaborative, equitable, and transparent processes result in the most meaningful impacts and plans and developments, et cetera. So we do a lot of work around engagement with developers, with nonprofits, with municipalities on a wide range of topics. So who are you? I don't think you can post and share with, or maybe you can share with everyone. Feel free to write in the chat who you are, where you're coming from. It's always great to get a sense of who's in the room and who we're speaking to in these types of conversations. And if you want, you can share what land you're on as well. Okay, so context, why are we here? As mentioned, we need more housing, and that I come from a strong stance on that. I think a lot of people who work in the engagement realm want to act as like a neutral third party. And while we're neutral in many ways, we still are urban planners and believe in good planning and want to see more housing developed in the best ways possible within the city. So to start in framing this narrative, cities and especially Toronto are not stable. I'm sure most people here have seen this map of the land use map, which shows most of the city as neighborhoods, which are considered stable. But we as planners, developers, community members know that cities are always evolving and are always changing, and that's how it is and how it's going to happen. We also know that Toronto's growing and evolving at a really rapid rate. I think 700,000 new people are going to be coming to Toronto by 2050. So there's a lot of change happening. But at the same time, as all of this change and development and more people have come, more than half of residential neighborhoods in Toronto have actually lost population as the size of the city has doubled. And this source comes from More Neighbors, which is a pro-housing volunteer-led group. So feel free to look them up. They're doing great work and maybe are here today. I also want to share some kind of pieces, usually when planners and engagement specialists talk about changes coming to a neighborhood, we really focus on the planning policy, jargon, maybe talk about the area context, but we don't talk about external factors that are taking place, which are really important. So aside from obviously the pandemic and many other like racial inequities and other inequities happening, there are two other major crises to focus on. The first is the climate emergency. So, in the summer when the IPCC published their report around climate change, Municipal World provided top 10 municipal climate actions, the first one being to target the missing middle infill housing. So when we have these conversations, this is like very needed and very important within our cities to add to the housing stock. So I think that it should be central to the conversations that we share and how we talk about the missing middle in these conversations. The second, obviously, is the affordable housing crisis. And while things like the missing middle, inclusionary zoning, there's different things that the municipality, developers, province, federal government are doing, a lot of us still feel that there's not enough happening and that the only way you can really afford to even rent or own in the city is by finding richer parents. So there's two really essential crises that are happening, but the way we still talk about planning and the way we engage with communities is really through this land use map. And there is an official plan review underway, and hopefully this will change a bit, but right now this is the focus. The other focus is on Jane Jacobs, who I love. I really love a lot of her theories, but NAMA has actually a great mini webinar on Jane Jacobs and kind of her relevance today, because a lot of the theories from 60 years ago don't really relate to today. I'm not going to get into them in too much detail, but things around neighborhood preservation that a lot of these groups use to talk about development in their areas shouldn't really relate to modern day approaches to urban planning. Some of the things that she really was great at was changing planning from being very outcome oriented, where we, just have some planners sitting at a board table and then we get highways like this, to being process oriented, where we're really engaging with communities. The problem is who has access to these processes. So a lot of times it's people who have the time and money to really participate in these democratic processes. So, you have what I'm sure has been a topic of conversation, is the NIMBY movement. You have, people like Margaret Atwood really opposing an 8-story annex development. We have people opposing parking lots being turned into affordable housing, all in the name of neighborhood preservation, which is really not necessarily fair. At the same time, increasingly, especially since COVID, we have YIMBYs. We have people coming out saying, no, we need development. We need new opportunities. And yes, we can shape them to be good and great, but we need more housing. So there are now these two groups. And where we used to focus on this, like, how do we engage with the NIMBYs? How do we deal with confrontation, et cetera? There's a new approach to really trying to talk to both of them and seeing how we can engage both. So with that kind of overview of the context, how does this relate to meaningful engagement today? How do we engage both NIMBYs and YIMBYs? And I know I'm simplifying it, but let's just look at it from that lens. And I think a lot of maybe developers in the room or people who work in planning are feeling a bit jaded. I know that I've gone through that, seeing that, often these processes can slow down a process. It's only certain people who come out and they really hold things up. So why do we even engage? Can't we just not engage? In addition to it being, by law that we have to engage, there are also great ways of helping to shape a development and also to bring the community on board and in terms of education and advocacy. So here are a number of considerations that I want to outline for you. So the first is to shift the narrative. So, we've often talked to communities from a place of fear and confrontation, fear that that they're not going to like the plans, and a sense of confrontation, that it's going to be antagonistic. But instead, if we can shift our lens to focus on excitement about a project and an opportunity for collaboration and to collect feedback in meaningful ways, it can shift our whole approach to engaging with communities. So the next piece is around setting clear objectives. So why do we want to engage? It's not just about building housing. It's about contributing to a community and seeing that as an essential piece. It's about learning from communities and hearing constructive feedback. So not just focusing on height, probably not focusing on height, but talking about public realm, talking about accessible design and other elements that are really important to consider as we develop. And then the third is build trust in community support and long-term capacity. These are only some objectives, but there could be more. But these are some really important ones to think through. The next step is to engage diverse people and experiences. I've only been out of planning school for about 8 years, but we originally talked about engaging local businesses, residents associations, and direct neighbors. And that was who you spoke to. You spoke to direct neighbors who were like most directly impacted, and the residents associations, maybe businesses. But increasingly, there's a push and a need to speak to other people, housing advocates, youth, community groups, people with diverse abilities. We're working on one mid-rise development project right now where we met with people with diverse abilities, and they're really shaping what accessible design looks like, where ramps should go. Are there opportunities for accessible design in the units? We're having zero conversations on height, whether it should be 15 stories or 12 stories, and really focusing on the things that actually matter. So this can really help shape these conversations and dialogues. And I just love this. Really quickly, working on a project in Mississauga, when we asked a kid around what he wanted to see, he said, include more houses close by so you don't have to drive too far. It's like, youth get it. They understand that it's not just about parking or things like that, but that it's about, having houses close by, density, all of that kind of stuff. The second piece is to engage early and often and really listen. I know the last speaker spoke to empathy and the need for that. And that's a huge piece of this, because while we're interested in these broader housing solutions to climate change and affordable housing crisis, we still have to understand that Carol, who's trying to get her kids to hockey practice, or has an elderly mom coming to visit, is very concerned about parking and where they're going to park and how they're going to do it, or concerned about privacy and noise. So it's not about denying those concerns, but it's about working collaboratively to address them and to share education about, other things happening or other policies in place, or to figure out collaboratively how to address some of these design concerns. And, empathy is part of most design processes. It's just not really part of planning, but it's often the first step in defining what the problem is, thinking about design and all this stuff. It's this people-centered approach that we often miss. And this is an example of how we've done things before. So this is at a statutory public meeting where we spoke to different community members, tenants of a building, direct neighbors, and other community groups, and asked them about their experiences and opportunities and showcase the different perspectives. So what this is also doing is showing people in the community, in the neighborhood, that there are different experiences and perspectives that should all be listened to when looking at a development project. And if you want more information about that map, I can share after, but in the interest of time, I'll move on. The next is ensuring transparent communications and opportunities for feedback. So it's really about defining the issues, really talking about the planning and policy framework, as well as external factors that I mentioned before, communicating the plan and what the process is going to be, and then focusing on what's open for influence and what's not. Often when we go out to communities, we just tell them about the project and ask them what they think. We should really be focused on what is the feedback we actually want, because often you're going to get we don't want anything here, or we want, a 2-story building or a community center, and that's just not going to happen. So an example is, we were working on a project where within the zoning bylaw, it could be 10 stories. And we wanted to do, the developer wanted to do 13 stories. And that would add affordable housing as well as community benefits. So we showed them those 2 options, one without those things, one with, and asked them their opinions on those, as opposed to just asking for general feedback about the project. So the next piece is engaging in diverse and creative ways. So, some of the things we've done have been very creative. We've led walking tours in neighborhoods to talk about the development. So it's bringing community out. It's giving them an opportunity to engage with each other, learn from each other, learn the different perspectives, and then also be in a space to talk about the development. It's a bit less scary when you're in the space talking about it as opposed in a community center. Obviously, with COVID, et cetera, it's important to have virtual opportunities to engage, as well as more informal ways, often just text messaging with neighbors or having initial interview phone calls with neighbors, and having that kind of open and direct line is really important to that empathy piece and having people stay involved. Another thing we've done on larger projects, which could be considered in anything, is this community capacity piece. We've met with local grassroots organizations who just want to learn more about how housing is developed and what their role can be in ensuring that it's a good development. So not focused on we don't want any development, but how can they be involved in ensuring it's best for them and their community? And this helps to really build community support and community trust in projects. So that's a really high level, key considerations. And often what it ends up looking like is a bit of a 3-phase process. You could do it in different ways. But often what we do is we start with a discovery and some initial consultations. So we have interviews with people. We try to meet with as many diverse people as possible, as local neighbors, directly adjacent residents associations, other community organizations and groups. Then we often open it up for broader engagement, using a lot of different methods, but ensuring proactive communications, and also ensuring that on all of these pieces, we're collecting data and reporting on findings. And this can help to update designs based on the feedback. And then finally is the submission. We often do all of this before submission, but you can kind of do it either way. We submit to the city and ensure ongoing communications through website, newsletter, working groups, just phone calls, et cetera. And then we have community members participate in an iterative design process. So that's really high level. I can share an example after, but I'm going to open it up for questions now.
Thank you, Sarah. I have some questions. I also invited the audience to type their questions. I have several, so I'll see how I can get my questions answered while we also answer the audience questions. But one thing that I feel, for example, especially in open houses, that the dialogue is very adversarial, that professionals, the architects mostly, or the planners or the developers, in a way suffer from knowing too much. And then you come and talk to people who don't do that for a living, and that's totally fine. But then it's really frustrating to say, where do I even start to explain why density belongs near transit? And this is a very mild example. Or we had, another development that is on a main street that is in downtown could get the guidelines allow for much more than we even asked for. How do you even start saying that this property could have 6 stories, we are asking for 4? How do you even start having this dialogue when you know too much and the person in front of you doesn't do it for a living?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think clear communications and not using planning jargon is really important. So a lot of times the way that planners and developers engage is through really focusing on the official plan and the zoning and those policies. But if we can take a step back and talk about these external factors like climate, affordable housing crisis, and and then also be able to speak in just like more simple terms, it goes a really long way in terms of like kind of like building an actual dialogue about things. Oh,
sorry. I'm reading a question from Annie. To what extent are Indigenous communities and organizations engaged as part of these conversations?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we push for that a lot. So on our team, we work with Trina Moyen, who is Indigenous and does this kind of consultation with us. So we like to bring her onto projects to bring in these perspectives and opportunities for truth and reconciliation, whether it's like something from landscaping to maybe housing. And, you know, these are typically on larger projects, not on like kind of smaller infill. But, you know, right now we're working on a project and I can share it in the link. It's a church redevelopment. And as part of that, we're thinking about what heritage means. And so actually this Saturday at 2 p.m., we're leading an outdoor guided story tour where Trina and Jill Carter are talking about the Indigenous history of the area. And we're looking at how to incorporate that into the project, because often these heritage reports that we get really start like what they call post-contact, which like Indigenous people are still there after contact. So it's really about bringing those diverse narratives into this project, for instance. So we're working on that on a number of projects right now.
I have a follow-up question for that exact question. You started your presentation with asking who has access to this democratic process, right? And I can tell you, I'm a parent. 7 p.m. in my house is the busiest time of the day. There's no way that even if I want to support the project, I am able to, you know, avoid everything that's going on and go and speak to and advocate for, and I'm, you know, from the industry. What about all the demographics and communities who are excluded from, and then you end up with the angry, older generation homeowners, rich and privileged, who are going to speak against the project?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a great question. It's something that people are always thinking about, or should be thinking about. I think that one of the concerns people have is that it can be expensive and complex to try to do all this outreach, but I think it's so necessary. And it's really, in the grand scheme of things, not that expensive. So there's a few things. One is like providing those diverse options. So virtual options are really important, or like asynchronous, as like the city likes to call them. So like having an online survey or an opportunity to like watch a video, and be able to comment on it, or provide emails, or just like have phone calls. So like other opportunities as a side to like, you know, come out to this event. So for instance, these events that we're leading, you know, this one happening this weekend, we're going to be filming it after and then putting it online for people to watch and comment on if they like. Another big piece is often when it's a larger project, we offer honoraria to different community groups who do come out, because we're asking for their expertise and their advice. And just like how you'd pay a planning consultant to talk about that, often they should get paid in those situations. So that really does help with barriers. Right now, we're working on a project where we've developed this core group of community organizations and residents associations who are involved in a working group. So that's not just, as you mentioned, the people who we kind of think about coming out, but other people who want to see the development happen and just want to make sure that it's accessible, inclusive, and it's all of those great things.
I'm going to consolidate two questions into one, which is one, what do you hear? What common concerns do you hear in smaller projects? And the sub question is, what is the typical engagement approach that you take in smaller projects?
Yeah, I mean, the smaller projects is, you know, typically around parking, like it's often in neighborhoods. So parking, setbacks, privacy, and then also people just not wanting to have anything happen. So like those are some
general objection.
Just generally like, no. So the approach that we often take, like that's when you kind of like have to empathize, because those are real concerns. Like I get it. Like I'm frustrated if I can't find parking. I'm like a very new car owner. It's a big identity shift, but like, you know, it's hard to, it's really frustrating if you can't find that. And a lot of people, you know, rely on that kind of thing. So it's about talking with them about it, and then also figuring out ways to mitigate. So for instance, if you're thinking about privacy concerns, like what are the privacy considerations? What kind of balconies do you have? What kind of plantings do you have? So it's about really working collaboratively to address the issues that people have. Is kind of the approach to those kind of smaller projects, and having those like smaller conversations around that.
I'm trying to find some other questions or reading between the in order to provide the kind of. Sara, do you see the questions?
Yeah, can mixed use development at the missing middle scale be used to build community support by providing a material benefit? So i.e. by providing small scale commercial space or social infrastructure? Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think, you know, we do a lot of work with larger developments, but I think if it's possible at the missing middle scale to provide some small scale benefits, that would be great. The other piece is to like work with the different community groups in terms of advocating, because a huge piece is like, even larger scale developments, developers can't answer all of the city's issues on their own, but they can be involved in broader city building conversations. So I said up front, one of the objectives should be build community, not just housing. And that's not a developer doing that by themselves. It should be a collaborative process. So if they're just one piece of building, like, you know, a 4-story building, they can still be working with community groups with the city to advocate for the other additional services, et cetera, that are needed in the area, or policy changes or things like that. Other things that we often say is like, is it possible to, you know, if the site is empty, to like pilot projects or pilot things on the site, and to use it temporarily for a community garden space, a flea market, different things like that, to offer that kind of social infrastructure and support. Is a huge piece. And, you know, we've also done a lot of work with transitional housing, so affordable housing in like low rise neighborhood areas. And that's also controversial because a lot of people have there's a lot of stigma, unfortunately, around, you know, transitional housing for youth or for adults, et cetera. And often what they do is they have a community garden on their front lawn, and people can take things, or ensure maintenance is really good. So they've actually, like, a lot of what they've done is something that people who are trying to build missing middle should consider, like how to create privacy, how to create community on like a small lot, is really important.
Okay. You know, just got a question. I was just about to conclude, but let's ask that last question. Have you had an interest from groups interested in process to set up co-housing options?
No, we haven't. I think that's a great option. I think that's maybe a little too small scale, but we'd love to. It's a great opportunity. I've thought about co-housing options as well. And then for the next project around, for a project that doesn't require public input, what is the value? There is still a lot of value, I think, because, you know, if you're going to, often you have to go to committee of adjustment.
Exactly. It's not the same public input as in a rezoning application, but it's not that the process is, if you have angry neighbors, they don't care that it's not a rezoning. Yeah.
And just to do it proactively, so that like before they see a sign going up, you talk to them and you say, do you have any concerns? Like, we want to do this. It's just common courtesy. And then it also will help. And then hopefully you can get letters of support that you can bring to committee of adjustment.
That was a very good answer, or to conclude your session. Sara, thank you very, very much. That concludes our first day. That was very interesting. It went by so fast. So thank you very much for those of you who sticked around, and we'll see you tomorrow. And Sara, thank you very much. That was very That was very interesting, and it is a challenge. Sarah, thank you again. Have a great
Thanks,
rest
Mama.
of the day,
Great job.
everyone. Bye.
Enjoy the grads.